On the frigid morning of January 20, 1953, the White House stood in silence beneath a pale winter sun, the temperature hovering at 28 degrees Fahrenheit, while a bitter north wind whipped across the lawn, rattling the bare branches of the elm trees that lined the driveway and carrying the faint scent of snow and ice into the Oval Office. President Harry Truman, weary from having been awake since 5:30 a.m., stood at the window with his hands clasped behind his back and a tightness in his jaw, watching a sleek black limousine pull slowly to the north portico. Inside that car sat Dwight David Eisenhower, the man Truman had once called the greatest military leader America had ever produced, the general he had personally promoted to 5-star rank, appointed as Army Chief of Staff, made the first Supreme Commander of NATO, and even offered the presidency in 1948 with Truman himself ready to step aside and serve as vice president. Truman had planned the morning meticulously, arranging coffee just as Eisenhower liked it, laying out light refreshments in the Blue Room, and setting aside 30 precious minutes for a private conversation, imagining a final moment of civility, a gesture of respect between two men who had fought together to win a world war and labored to build peace in its aftermath, honoring a tradition that dated back generations. Every incoming president since William Howard Taft had visited his predecessor, acknowledging that the office of the presidency was larger than any one man, that democracy required grace and continuity. Yet the limousine remained unmoving, the engine idling, exhaust spilling into the crisp winter air, while the door stayed closed. White House staff, ushers, and Secret Service agents shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to do, as reporters and photographers observed a scene that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. Minutes ticked by, 8:46, 8:47, 8:48, until Truman finally gave up, walking down the steps to the car, joining Eisenhower in silence for the 12-minute drive to the Capitol, where the cold, hostile quiet stretched between them like an endless gulf, punctuated only by a brief, perfunctory inquiry about his son John, returned from Korea for the inauguration, a gesture that went unacknowledged, unthanked, and unremarked upon. The estrangement between these two men had been years in the making, rooted in the profound friendship that had once defined them, beginning with Truman's admiration for Eisenhower on the Autobahn outside Frankfurt in July 1945, a summer when Europe still lay in ruins, millions of displaced persons wandered aimlessly searching for home, and the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, smoke, and the lingering devastation of war. Truman, a farmer's son from Missouri with modest military experience as a World War I artillery captain, saw in Eisenhower, who had commanded over 2 million Allied troops in the largest military invasion in history, someone capable of uniting allies, managing impossible logistics, navigating delicate diplomacy, and shouldering responsibilities that no one man had ever faced before. On that concrete stretch of highway, examining bridges, overpasses, and engineering marvels with a combination of awe and curiosity, Truman recognized not only Eisenhower's brilliance but also his temperament. Calm under pressure, diplomatic with difficult personalities like Montgomery and Patton, decisive yet patient, and he resolved that this general, this soldier, should be president. Truman even offered to step aside for him in 1948, to serve as vice president while Eisenhower led the nation, an extraordinary proposal that stunned the general, who politely refused, insisting he was a soldier, not a politician, that civilian control of the military must remain sacrosanct, that he would finish his service and retire quietly. Yet Truman never wavered in his belief, praising Eisenhower in private and public, repeating that he was the one man capable of leading America through the dangerous years ahead, through the spread of communism, the tension of the Cold War, and the uncertainty of a world recovering from unimaginable destruction. Their friendship deepened in the immediate post-war years as they worked closely on demobilizing millions of soldiers, managing the early stages of NATO, and navigating the fragile post-war settlements in Germany and Japan. Truman relied on Eisenhower's counsel, Eisenhower respected Truman's decisions, and together they seemed an unbreakable team, bonded by shared triumphs, mutual admiration, and the certainty that each understood the immense weight of responsibility they bore. Yet the world would intervene, in the form of fear, ambition, and political expediency. The rise of Senator Joseph McCarthy, a demagogue from Wisconsin who rose to national prominence with fabricated claims of communist infiltration in the federal government, introduced a toxic new element into American politics. McCarthy's lies and accusations, designed to inflame public fear and destroy reputations, targeted even the most honorable men, including General George Marshall, Eisenhower's mentor, patron, and the man who had seen potential in an obscure staff officer and promoted him to supreme commander, transforming Eisenhower's life and shaping the course of history. In October 1952, at a critical campaign rally in Milwaukee, Eisenhower faced an agonizing choice: publicly defend Marshall against McCarthy's slanders, a move that risked alienating the powerful base of Republican voters in Wisconsin, or remain silent, compromising principle for political gain and the practicalities of unifying the party to win the presidency. Despite the moral clarity of defending a man who had shaped his career, Eisenhower, advised by campaign managers and party leaders, chose silence. The paragraph defending Marshall was cut from his speech, and he praised Wisconsin Republicans for their vigilance against communism, leaving McCarthy's attacks unchallenged. Newspapers immediately condemned the omission, calling it cowardly, and Truman, campaigning vigorously for Adlai Stevenson, denounced Eisenhower's actions as a betrayal of the highest order, a moral failure, evidence that a man willing to abandon his mentor for political expediency was unfit for the presidency. The campaign exacerbated their estrangement, and by the time Eisenhower won in a landslide, carrying 39 states and securing 442 electoral votes to Stevenson's 89, the personal rift was irreparable. During the transition, White House meetings were icy, tense, and unproductive. Eisenhower and his advisers treated Truman with suspicion, as though each brief, each piece of guidance was a trap, and Truman's offers of assistance and intelligence on Korea, the Soviet Union, and domestic budgets were met with guarded silence. Even small symbolic gestures, like Eisenhower choosing a Hamburg hat instead of the traditional silk top hat for the inauguration, became subtle declarations of autonomy and defiance. For the next 8 years, the estrangement persisted. Truman was never invited to the White House, never consulted, never acknowledged. They shared only ceremonial spaces at funerals, such as that of General Marshall in October 1959, where they sat side by side, unmoving, uncommunicative, and again at Speaker Sam Rayburn's funeral in 1961, where they exchanged nothing more than brief nods. Yet time, with its inevitable softening of anger, eventually created space for reconciliation. Following President Kennedy's assassination in November 1963, Truman and Eisenhower finally shared coffee at Blair House, speaking for more than an hour about the Cold War, Kennedy's legacy, and their respective presidencies, carefully avoiding the old wounds, never mentioning McCarthy, the Milwaukee speech, or the inauguration. In that long, measured conversation, they found a fragile restoration of civility, a recognition of what had been lost, and an acknowledgement of shared history, the triumphs and burdens of leadership, the victories and failures that had defined them both, and the enduring weight of decisions that shaped not only their lives but the course of a nation.